So verse 11 tells us, it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Now, if you go to Acts chapter 7, because you don't get all of the timestamps here in Exodus, Luke, when he's writing the Acts of the Apostles in chapter 7, he gives us a really fascinating overview in that chapter of Moses' life. And it all comes down to the number 40, which, again, we've talked about this before. In ancient cultures, the number 40 often means a long passage of time. So that's why it shows up so many times as 40 days or 40 years. It could be literal, but it could also just mean a really long period of time. Well, in Acts chapter 7, it breaks up Moses' life into 3 iterations of 40. The first 40 years in Egypt, the second 40 years out in Midian with Jethro, where he gets married and has 2 sons, and the last 40 years out in the wilderness wandering with the children of Israel before they get to go into the promised land, and he's translated at the very end. So 40, 40, 40. And if you think about that, he spent a long time. Maybe it's exactly 40 years. Maybe it's just a long passage of time in Pharaoh's court, in Pharaoh's household. And now he goes out to start seeing what's going on with his brethren. We don't know for sure how many memories he has or how he learned his true identity at this point as to his lineage. But he sees bad things happening to these Hebrews by these Egyptian slave drivers. And so he slays the Egyptian and buries him in the sand. Well, the next day he sees 2 Hebrews striving together, and he asks them, "Why are you being rude to each other?" And their response is pretty negative in return. Well, what are you going to do to us what you did to that Egyptian?
Yeah, who made thee a prince and a judge over us, verse 14.
At which point Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." He realizes, that's not going to look good. So
that I've killed an Egyptian when I'm a Hebrew.
So now look at verse 15. When Pharaoh heard about what had happened, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh. So the first of 3 40-year phases of Moses' life is now complete, and he goes in and he begins phase 2, which we're not going to spend very much time on. He goes out to Midian.
It's a long way.
It's a long journey.
And it's a tough journey.
Getting away from Pharaoh and from that conviction that would lead to his death.
And I'll just point out briefly, if you look at a map, you'll see, here's the Nile River, River Delta, you have the Sinai Peninsula. All that's controlled by Egypt and the Pharaoh. So if you can get all the way over to Midian, which is where modern-day Saudi Arabia is, well, then you're outside the power of the Pharaoh. And so that's why Moses has to go so far away. He has to get outside the jurisdiction of the Pharaoh, which is all the way over both arms of the Red Sea.